Episode 2, The Immovable Object. For a quick tip, we're going to discuss ways to optimize your sleep. For the main topic, we're going to talk all about isometrics. For a bunch of randomness, random one, we're going to talk about a different take on the Bible. And for our random two, does environment dictate performance? What's going on, everybody? Hope you're doing well out there. Listen, I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Live Studio, and you're listening to the S.C.A.L Method Podcast. All right, for our quick tip, we want to talk about ways to optimize your sleep. But first, why do you want to optimize your sleep, right? Look, first reason, better recovery from your workouts. It boosts your immune system. 2, 3, it keeps you from being all emo everywhere you go, right? And part of that leads in 4 is because of 4. The balancing of your hormones, right? So you want to optimize your sleep so you can better balance your hormones. Specifically, leptin and ghrelin, the metabolism hormones here. So you want to optimize your sleep for those reasons, and there's many more like stress relief. Again, the injury prevention is pretty big here, right? So those are reasons to start off. Now, how do you do it? What you want to do is essentially, you want to set your body on a timer, right? So it's all about timing here. So you want to try and go to sleep at the same time and try and wake up at the same time. Your body builds a rhythm on that. A lot of how your body works, it works in the form of rhythm, right? How does it move? How does it operate? Timing of it, all that fun stuff, right? And so you want to stay away from things that could throw that rhythm off or throw your timing off, a la caffeine and alcohol. You want to stay away from, not like overall, well, kind of overall, but like closer towards the time for you to go to bed, right? So obviously you don't want to drink like 8 cups of coffee before going to bed. Or you don't want to have like 20 different shots of something or another before going to bed. Alcohol and caffeine will jack up your sleep, right? So you want to try and maintain the timing of going down at the same time, waking up at the same time. All right, that's one thing. That's one way you want to look at it, right? And a lot of that stuff is going to be based on maintaining that timing and building that timing, right? The next thing you want to do is you want to actually go to sleep in a dark and cold room or chilled room, right? This one is a little weird for me, right? Because I actually get better sleep in a warm room. Don't know why. Don't know how. It's just, I love the heat. I absolutely love the heat. I hate the cold. So even as I'm putting on blankets and things like that, I don't like it. But studies show that if you're in a dark and cold room, you're more likely to get better sleep. So there's that. There's also some weird studies that show like if you had there's certain colors of your room that'll get you prepared for sleep. And I think it was like purple is one of the worst colors that you can have for good sleep. But I think it was like a gray or some form of blue was really good for room color to go to sleep. I don't really know if that's a little bit of foo-foo going on there, but it's a thought, right? Next thing you want to do, you want to make sure that you are shutting off all screens before going to bed. Like all of them. So like stop working all the way up until going to bed. No tablets, no TVs, no phones, no e-readers, none of that stuff, right? Because obviously maybe not obviously, but hopefully you've heard of the effects that blue light has on us, especially as we're trying to go to sleep. That's another way you can jack up your sleep, okay? So you want to basically stay away from the screens well before, going to bed, right? And you actually want to start to reduce the amount of light that you see the closer you get to bed. Okay? So all of this is helping you, again, build up this routine for sleep. Next thing you want to do, make sure you get enough magnesium. Make sure you're getting enough magnesium, right? That leads to better sleep. Dark leafy greens, things like that. Exercise is important, right? But you got to keep them. The rule of thumb with exercise is the closer you get to bedtime, the less intense the exercise should be. Okay? So you're not going to go do a spin class 10 minutes before going to bed. All right? Those are and then I guess the big thing is there's a lot of people who will, have no problems falling asleep and then wake up in the middle of the night. And one of the worst things you can do is just to lay there and stare at the ceiling. Don't do that, right? So if you happen to wake up in the middle of the night, restart the whole routine again, right? So jump right back in. It's like, okay, get up, move around a little bit, because what you want your body to be trained to, do and figure out is that when you're in the bed, you should be sleeping or other things, but, married person stuff, right? But primarily sleeping. You want your body to be prepared for sleeping at that point in time. So that's another reason why, again, you want to keep the work and all that other stuff away from it. So if you end up waking up in the middle of the night, redo your night routine, right? Just do a condensed version of it, and then get back into bed to go to sleep. Okay. And I guess kind of going back, just backtrack a little bit, right? Because I know this is supposed to be a quick tip, so I'm not trying to go in extreme detail. Maybe I'll do a sleep episode at some point. But you want to make sure, if you do end up doing something, get a book, actual book to read, and sit in a chair maybe next to the bed to read, to go back, to get back to sleep or something like that. Or it's really good. I hear a lot of people have a mobility stretching routine right before bed, right? It's calming, it's cool, and it actually leads to better sleep. I used to do it for years. So you do things like that. Another tip is to lay on your right side to sleep. Lay on your side, right? You don't want to sleep on your belly or your back, right? So I guess scientifically or neurologically or both, I guess, right? It happens to jumpstart the recovery process if you're laying on your side, right? So it typically doesn't matter which side, but there are studies, more and more studies coming out now that if you sleep on your right side, that actually promotes better brain and heart health, right? So it jumpstarts the recovery process for your brain so that it can kind of cleanse. I'm not saying cleanse of any toxins, but it gets rid of all the waste and all that fun stuff. I mean, it's basically what your body does overall at night anyway, right? It's the recovery and repair period, right? So sleeping on your right side jumpstarts that process for your brain and for your heart. But if you're late term pregnant and late term preggo, basically, obviously, you got to sleep on your left side, right? Because your uterus is basically bullying your organs. So you want to make sure that you're on your left side, right? But either side in general is good for you. Just don't sleep on your back or your belly, right? It doesn't help you, right? And it doesn't promote typically really, really good sleep. Okay. All right. So those are the tips for sleeping. Let's get on to our main topic. Isometric exercises are basically exercises that you do where you increase the tension of the muscle without actually moving at the joint. So if I were going to do a bicep curl here, right? So here I'll have my arm outside. Now I'm going to do a bicep curl, right? And typically what we would do is we would flex, and there's movement at my elbow at the joint, right? An isometric exercise is basically I'm holding at a 90-degree angle here, right? I'm flexing that bicep, and I'm basically either holding or moving against something, but it's not, you won't see any visible movement here. But the bicep is fully contracted, basically, right? So it's one of those things where, so there's three types of movement, I guess, when it comes to this style of training, right? So you have your isometric, which means same, metric means length, same length. The muscle maintains the same length, okay? So it doesn't extend or it doesn't lengthen and it doesn't shorten. It's right there, right? Then there's also isotonic or isotonic exercises. Those are the traditional lifting exercises where you're contracting and then you have the eccentric portion of it and you're letting it back down. That basically says that the muscle is maintaining same tonic tension, okay? So isotonic, same tension, right? And then there's isokinetic, right? And that's basically your muscles are moving, and you usually need specialized equipment for this, but your muscles are moving at the same speed. So same kinetic speed, right? And you basically are contracting the muscle same speed throughout and even releasing it same speed throughout. So the whole movement, both back and forth, is literally at the same speed. So what we're talking about is just that single portion of it, that first part, the isometric, same length, right? Again, you're contracting against, or you're adding tension without moving the joint, okay? So isometric exercises, they've been used for centuries, right? And they were really made popular like maybe in the 60s, because that was the style of bodybuilding, right? And you know what? Even before the 60s, what am I talking about? It was even before the 60s when they were really using isometrics as well. And I mean, even look, Bruce Lee, he was famous for using. Well, I mean, he was famous for other things, but he was famous for using isometric exercises, and he would flex, and you would see like every single striation of that dude's body, right? And Bruce Lee was a G. So, that's just, I mean, they've been used forever now, right? So, what are the types of isometric exercises that you can really utilize and use in your own programming and your own workouts, right? So there's there's two versions, right? The first version is yielding isometrics, and those are isometrics like planks, okay, where you're forcing your body to remain stable, right? So and that's really what it is. Like, you're tightening up the muscles, you're not moving at the joints, and you're locking everything in, and you're maintaining that position. So you're forcing your body to maintain a particular position with weight or without weight, whatever it may be. But that's yielding isometric exercises. And then there's overcoming isometric exercises, and that's where you're moving against the immovable object, right? So you're flexing every muscle that you have against this object that is not going to move at all. Therefore, your joints aren't moving at all, right? An example of that would be like an isometric leg press, right? If you can imagine maybe stacking up the weight so much and having the safeties on and you're pressing out, it ain't going anywhere, but you're actually giving the effort into doing that. Or there's specialized equipment for stuff like this too, right? There's the IsoFit, right? And that's a platform with a bar basically attached to it, and you do a whole bunch of overcoming isometric exercises with it, right? So those are the two main types. And then there's some, there's this, I guess it's not like a third category or whatever, but it's a way to mix both of those up, where you start off with a traditional lift of sorts, and you move into holding your position, which will be yielding, but then trying to move against the immovable object, which would be overcoming. So it's like, for instance, we could let's go back to the leg press, right? So we talk about the leg press, and what we have is, let me say, like, you have, what we have here is we have actual chains on a portion of the leg press, so that it gives you a little bit of room to actually press out and press the weight out, but then it comes, before you fully lock out, there's a stopping point, and then you're pressing against that for a certain amount of time, right? That is a perfect mix of the two. right? Or you could have a bench press. I wouldn't advise this without any safeties or without additional spotters or whatever, but you could do a barbell bench press in which you only do half of the bench press from your chest up, right? So you start off at very close to your chest and you press up and maybe you get halfway and you're pressing against safeties, right? And that would be, yielding and overcoming basically, while doing a traditional isotonic rep, which is a different experience, right? But those are the different ways or the different kinds of isometric exercises and how they kind of break out into those categories, okay? So the next question is then, why do them, right? So one big reason is it increases strength. It increases the strength gains by a lot, right? But as with anything, it lasts for a certain amount of time, and then you're going to have to change it up. But for the time that you're doing it, it definitely increases your strength. It helps stabilize. All these exercises help stabilize your joints by way of making your tendons and ligaments stronger, which is good because if you have some limitation because of injury or disability or medical condition of some sort, these are great to put in your program. You'll still get the workout and you'll also kind of add to your ability at that point. So they're great for that population, right? They're also really decent for athletes, right? Because they've been shown to increase force production and increase neural drive, right? They're great for bodybuilders because to do some isometric exercises in a particular way, you have to recruit a boatload of muscle fibers. I mean, like all of them, right? And they're also really good for locking in form without worrying about having a bunch of weight coming down and crashing on you. For instance, like you do a bench press, right? It's the barbell bench press is, believe it or not, a very technical exercise, and it's hard to get some practice in it because doing a dumbbell bench press is similar, not the same thing though, right? Because you have a little bit more freedom in each individual arm, right? So the thing about that is you can use an isometric bench press where you don't have any weight on there and you're just pressing up against the immovable object, and that way you can kind of lock in your form. Like, so if you typically have your elbows too high, you can bring them down and you can actually force production in your chest. And that is, for that reason, isometrics are clutch. So how do I use them? Or rather, how can you use them? How can you implement these exercises into your programs? So first things first, the way I typically build up, I usually build up a foundational program for new clients that come in that include isometrics. Why? Because again, many people come to me with previous injuries and whatnot, and or previous, ways of moving that aren't necessarily conducive towards, longevity, right? And that's just a wordy way of saying they don't move right. Right? So I usually put isometrics in there as a foundational builder, so to speak, so that I can train up good mechanics, all right, and get them to do like the bench press, squat, deadlift, whatever, with good mechanics, and then we can also get that little bit of strength to start, right? And then it branches off into other areas from there. But I definitely use it as a foundational program or foundational build-up type thing, just so we can get that base strength, right? I'll typically use it for like post-activation potentiation for athletes, PAP, for athletes, right? That again goes back to increasing that neural drive and increasing force production, right? It's just preparing their bodies for whatever sport that they're in. Right. And for my muscle heads, for my bodybuilders out there, I easily use it just to recruit, get the nervous system primed, but recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. And I'll use it in a variety of different ways at different moments for them, just so, because a lot of bodybuilding is essentially about multiple angles, multiple modes, multiple modalities, and then changing them up, right? Forcing your body to adapt and hopefully get stronger, build muscle, right? So for my bodybuilders out there, what would I do, or what do I typically do, and what can you do, and how can you use these isometrics or isometric exercises to further get you along your way, right? So first things first, when you're doing isometric exercises for muscle gain, for lean muscle tissue, for getting big, getting jacked, right? You want to train at longer muscle lengths. Meaning, okay, we're going to use the bicep curl again. We're going to be here. Okay, so you don't necessarily want to do an isometric exercise from here. You actually want to do it from here, right? So the muscle is stretched out. It's still not contracting, but you're applying tension from here. So you want to train at longer muscle lengths, so the muscle is stretched out a little bit more, and you want to do the isometric exercises from that point, at that angle, right? The next thing you want to do for bodybuilding, essentially for lean muscle gain, you want to consider the duration of the isometric exercise, right? So the duration is the one that's more important towards lean muscle tissue, whereas the contraction or the intensity of the contraction lends itself towards the strength, right? So we're talking about the bodybuilding right now. You want to look at rounds of maybe 20 seconds to 1 minute of a hold each one, right? And you want to focus a little bit more on the yielding isometrics, not so much the overcoming isometrics, okay? So let me run that through again, right? You want to train at longer muscle lengths, one, right? So you want to have the muscle stretched out more, and you want to do isometrics from the stretched out position more, okay? Two, you want to make sure that you're focusing on the duration of the hold, okay? As opposed to the intensity of the contraction, right? You want to hold for longer. So this is an endurance game here, right? 20 seconds to a minute per hold, okay? And then what you want to do after that, or the next thing that you want to be concerned about, is making sure you're doing yielding isometrics as opposed to overcoming isometrics, right? The yielding, remember, is forcing your body to maintain a certain position. So I would typically do this in a way of like, hey, back to the bicep curl. I'm doing actually, 10 isotonic bicep curls. And then on that last one, I might go up and then come down and then bow and hold at the stretched out position from there. And then I will do the isometric hold for 20 seconds to a minute. And that, first of all, that's a quick way to get a really nasty pump, right? And that's kind of what we're going after. And not the only thing we're going after, but it's one of the things that we're going after when it comes down to bodybuilding, or, just building this lean muscle tissue up, right? Because, lean muscle mass, very important for life, for longevity, and there'll be an episode about that too. So that's what you want to consider, right? And sometimes you can even flip it, right? So there's other times where you could say, I'm gonna start off with an overcoming isometric exercise and do it for time still, right? So we're looking at the endurance. The duration is what's most important here. But instead, I'll do overcoming. Let's just say we'll do overcoming bench press, overcoming isometric bench press, and you're pressing 20 seconds. And then you get off of that and you go right into dumbbell bench press for a set of 10. That's another way. So you could do either way, right? You could do your regular set, and then at the end of that regular set, 20 seconds to a minute hold. Or you could start off with a 20-second to a minute hold and then go into just a plain regular set. There are a number of ways you could do it. Also, another thing to consider, if you're really focused on muscle gain, flex in between sets. I know it sounds crazy, and I know it's probably pretty annoying too, where you see people just in there, take my shirt off and I'm gonna flex in the mirror. And I'm sorry to say, there's actually some benefit to that. Maybe I'm not so sorry to say, but I'm in here by myself. So, there actually is some benefit to that flexing in between sets, because just simply flexing is an isometric hold for that is yielding isometric, right? You're not moving against the immovable object here. You're flexing, you're and holding, maintaining position and tension without moving any of the joints. It's really beneficial for you. So flexing in between sets is actually a thing, right? And that's also why, if you think about it, what a loaded stretch is. And there's some literature on loaded stretching. Actually, there's a lot of literature on it. Loaded stretching and how that leads to muscle gain. Well, all it is another isometric exercise at training at long muscle lengths, right? So, consider throwing in some loaded stretches as well. So think about this, right? So you hear what I'm saying, right? There's a way you can build muscle with loaded stretches, right? That's basically what Pilates is. And that's why it works so well. I love Pilates, by the way. Like, I think it is a great complement to a traditional resistance training, barbell training, dumbbell training, whatever, but a traditional resistance training program. It's a great complement, and it makes sure that your muscles and joints and everything stays good, right? But that's why it's so good, because it's essentially a bunch of isometrics at long muscle lengths, right? So if you're looking at muscle gain, those are my tips for you, right? Again, focus on duration, 20 seconds to a minute. Longer muscle lengths, consider flexing in between sets, and loaded stretches are clutch. Okay. Now, for if you wanted to, for my strength people, my power lifters out here, right? If you wanted to use isometrics for strength gain, right? This one's kind of the easy one, right? You want to focus on overcoming isometrics, right? That's going to be your best friend here, right? Pushing or pulling or moving against the immovable object, right? And your focus here, you want it to be the intensity of the contraction. So again, bodybuilding is the duration, and for powerlifting or for strength, it's the intensity of the contraction. And you're only going to be able to hold that intense contraction for a short amount of time. So you're only looking at 5 to 10 seconds per, hold, okay? And you want to take that's max force, max effort, pushing, pulling, what have you, okay? 5 to 10 seconds, right? And you want to do this at multiple angles as well, right? So whereas bodybuilding is typically longer muscle lengths, for strength gain, you actually want to do it at multiple angles. So you want lengthened, a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter, a little bit shorter, fully contract. Just if I were using the bicep curl as my example, it seems to be the example of the episode anyway, right? So you want to have train the overcoming isometrics at almost fully stretched out. You want to bring it in a little bit, multiple angles, because the results or the effects are somewhat localized, okay? So meaning if you do, like, let's say you bend your arm at a 90-degree angle and you do a bicep curl, isometric, overcoming isometric hold, right? And you're trying to flex into it, like max force into it. That's only really going to get you stronger at that point. So then you got to stretch it out a little bit, and then it's going to get you stronger at that point, at that angle, and then stretch it out a little bit more, and it's going to get you stronger there. So if you want total strength throughout the entire movement, you have to do that motion or that isometric exercise at different lengths, okay? Or at different angles, sorry. So that one's pretty much an easy one. That's really what it comes down to, right? And the background behind that is it basically activates your nervous system to pull. So this is how you basically get stronger without adding any muscle, right? Doing isometrics in that way gets you stronger faster without adding actual lean tissue, right? So there's a reason people would want to do that. So because I mean, some people are like huge, you're jacked already, and it was like, I don't want any more muscle, right? But I want to get stronger, right? That's the way you do it, right? Especially like if you're talking about like a power lifter, they have to, if they get to a certain weight, then they're in a different class, right? So they want to stay where their weight is, but they want to get stronger. So basically, they got to get stronger without adding muscle, right? And then there's practical uses for that as well, right? So that's what it is for strength. Now for my athletes here, the way you would train isometrics is kind of an offshoot of the strength version of it, right? So, but you want to kind of change the way the strength isometrics go. So essentially is this, right? You want to go for a more of a like ballistic approach, right? So it's like a rapid fire type idea here. So you're only looking for 3 to 5 seconds per round, right? But you want to get to peak contraction as quickly as possible, right? So it's like, bang, right there, you're in it, full contraction. Like it's almost like a shot goes off, pow, right? You're right in there, right? And you want to get to that point where you want to do multiple 3 to 5 second rounds in a row. Again, getting to peak contraction as quickly as possible. Okay. Here, you want to focus on, again, so the quality, not the quality, we're not worried about the duration, but we're worried about the intensity of the contraction. Max contraction here as well, right? What you also want to do, you actually want to train at longer muscle lengths here, because that promotes tendon stiffness, which is really good, right? It's part of the injury prevention thing for athletes. So let me go over this really quick, right? You still want to be focused on the intensity of the contraction, but you want to get to max contraction as quickly as possible. You're only doing this for rounds of 3 to 5 seconds, and you want to train at longer muscle lengths because that helps your tendons out, promotes tendon stiffness, and ultimately improves your movement for whatever sport you're playing, right? This is mainly about force production, right? So power is basically just the amount of like heavy weight moving it fast, right? So using it that way, and again, another way for athletes is post-activation potentiation, and that's where you can use different types of isometric exercises. But it seems like typically overcoming isometrics work best here for athletes, right? So you can use it as PAP in the front end, or you could use it as the bulk of the actual workout with the 3 to 5 second holds, bang, 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 getting to peak contraction as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's the whole breakdown. That's the whole breakdown for your style of training, whatever it may be. But those are the isometric exercises. Those are the categories. That's how it breaks down. See if you can implement it into your programming. There's nothing but a benefit there, right? Sometimes it gets a little tricky in trying to, apply them in different ways, especially when it comes to weightlifting. But it's fully possible, right? So try those out. See how they work for you. Let me know, okay? But that's our isometric portion. That was our main topic for this episode. Now let's get on to some randomness. So I follow this guy by the name of Myron Golden, and I know he has kind of a funny name, but he seems to be a guy who's full of wisdom, right? But he's an entrepreneur basically. But what he does is he uses biblical principles and applies them to his business, and he helps people apply biblical principles to their businesses, right? So he's a pretty cool dude. Never met him or anything like that, but I've learned a few things from him, right? So he has this one video. He has one of the most interesting ways to describe the Bible that I've heard, and I actually wrote it down. So basically, what he said was like the Bible is about a king, a kingdom, a royal family, and a culturalization of a foreign land called Earth. There's also a fake kingdom called the kingdom of this world, and both kingdoms have different tenets. The tenets of the kingdom of God are freedom, profits, abundance, and eternal life. The tenets of the kingdom of this world are wages, slavery, lack, and death. And then he goes on to explain that the Bible isn't a religious book, right? And I agree with him on all of that, right? The Bible is not a religious book, right? We're not worried about religion per se. We're worried about relationship, right? So, I found that to be a very interesting explanation, right? It kind of makes it sound like Game of Thrones a little bit, right? But it's one of those things where I pinpointed a couple words there, right? So he made the comparisons, right? Kingdom of this world comparatively to the kingdom of heaven, basically, right? Kingdom of this world, there's death associated with that. Kingdom of heaven, there's eternal life associated with that. So he made the comparison, and I think he mixed up the order of the comparisons, unless I wrote it down wrong. That might be on me. But basically, eternal life compares to death, abundance compares to lack, freedom compares to slavery, and then you have this one that I found the most interesting: profits compare to wages. Now, I actually kind of struggled a little bit with that, right? It's just like it's holy to profit, right? And profit off of what? So I couldn't start there. I had to start with wages, right? I mean, of course, the wages of sin is death, right? So you get that part, and right, that was kind of where I started to try and understand what he was saying here, and then I realized that I think where he was going with this one was basically like from a business perspective, profit. What is profit? Profit is what you have or what's attributed to the business, and what's positive, what tools, resources the business has after paying everything else, right? Profits is what you have after you take out your expenses, after you pay other people off, right? So in the kingdom of heaven, basically, I'm thinking where he was going with this was the idea is that the price is already paid, right? And so the opposite of that is something that has yet to be paid. And so I guess that's where wages comes from, right? I got to think about that a little bit more, but I just found it interesting because it's one of the most interesting ways to describe what the Bible is, right? Past it being, it's just a book of stories, or it's not the Word of God, or it is the Word of God, right? There's so many different ways that people explain it, and this pretty much takes the cake for me in terms of, interest, right? It's a very interesting way of explaining it and what it is, right? Yeah, so that was really quick, just really quick, really random. But I like the Myron Golden guy. He's cool, right? Daniel Priestley. He's another entrepreneur, pretty smart guy. I think he's come out with a few books and stuff like that. I followed him for a little bit here. He has this phrase that basically says that environment dictates performance. And for a while, I kind of understood that phrase as, I co-signed on that phrase, so to speak. And I was like, yep, exactly. Environment dictates performance. And what he considers to be your environment is basically all of the people, systems, situations, things that, things around you that kind of just, that basically have everything to do with what you are to achieve, right? So he basically says your environment, you can't, I'm not going to say that, but he basically says that those parts of your environment will tell you directly what you're going to achieve, right? So if you want to change your outcome, start with your environment. So initially, again, like I said, I kind of co-signed with that, and I get it, right? I know what he's saying. I understand it. But then I always had the question of, well, doesn't that eliminate the idea of personal responsibility and accountability? And it does, right? Because one could easily just say then, well, I didn't achieve this outcome because of the way I grew up. And you hear people say that all the time, right? So it's like, I grew up in the hood, so that's why I did what I did. Like, or or on a different scale, like I grew up in an abusive home, and that's why I abuse everybody who comes in contact with me. Right now, that's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more complex, but it still doesn't like it kind of applies still, because it's just like you're saying that something that happened to, like, the environment that you were in before is telling you what you have in life right now. And that's just not just no. And so it really gets rid of the idea of personal responsibility, because then if you could just easily blame your environment for everything, then you can really do no wrong, right? And that's where I kind of started to split from that idea that environment dictates performance. So instead, what I think it is, and what I kind of sign on to, is just a slight twist to that, right? It's not just your environment that dictates performance. It's your response to your environment that dictates performance. And we got to break down, we got to frame this a little differently, right? I use the word frame because that's important, right? You can have two people from the same environment and end up with very, very different lives. They end up making different choices. But why do they end up making different choices even though they were in the same environment? Well, because they framed it differently. They framed their environment differently. Whereas one person says, well, we both grew up poor. We're in the hood and we're poor, right? One person says, I'm poor, so I never was able to make anything of it. And the other person, who might have the same amount, might go through the same exact thing, will say, well, I wasn't poor, I was rich because I had this, and this. So they just reframed it. And that led to their success. So what I found was that people who could reframe those things, especially when it comes to the past, people who can reframe the past end up being the most successful in whatever it is, right? So there's going to be a lot of framing and reframing talk coming up very, very soon, especially when we start to discuss having a sound heart. But so let me pull back a little bit. What do I think? What is your environment, first of all, right? Your environment is basically the situation or the conditions or the situations that you live and operate in, right? It's the sum total of all of the living and non-living things that influence the decisions you make, right? So that's the thing. So that's why I say it's what you think of your environment, basically, right? That dictates performance. And it's like, so how, because you could have the same environment, but it affects your thinking differently, right? And what you think is ultimately what you're going to do, right? So I think it's a very interesting notion, and I think that's a worthy add-on to environment dictates performance, because that can only take you but so far, right? Especially like if you take the corporate world, right? You have two employees here, and you set this culture, company culture, so everybody's privy to this particular company culture. Now, can it be one for one exactly the same? No, they have different bosses and they have different teams and different groups and all that fun stuff. But in general, you can make the comparison and say, like, hey, look, we're in the same culture, we have the same environment. Why is this person's performance different than this person's performance, right? And a lot of times it comes down to decisions that they make. Ultimately, that's your success is dependent upon the decisions you make, not how these external forces act upon you, right? Because there's always going to be some external force acting upon you. What you do with that is what's going to determine what you achieve. So it's not the external forces, your environment, that dictates performance. It's you. You dictate. It's your thinking that dictates. It's your feeling. It's your regulation of emotions. It's your, you see where I'm going? You see where I'm going with this, right? Performance is internal, right? Performance is internal. What you think will become what you do. And so that's my little, just the add on, or, I mean, it kind of sounds like I'm going the complete opposite. Well, not the complete opposite, right? But that's what I would add on. That's what I would say, because otherwise you're just eliminating the personal responsibility. You're eliminating the accountability, and you don't want to do that if you're going to be successful, right? Again, the most successful people hold themselves accountable, probably more than most, especially when they don't have to. And by saying that success is strictly dependent upon external forces, that's where you kind of run into some difficulty, right? So those are just my 2 cents, okay? So there you have it, folks. That's episode 2 in the books. All right. Listen, we know what we're going to go through. I need y'all to subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like and follow and do all that other social media stuff, right? But comment, subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going in this one too, right? I'm very curious about what you think about my ideas on the environment dictating performance, and not so much, but more so your response to it, right? I want to hear what you think here, right? So hit me up, let me know. It's all out there. I'm gonna go through the like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. But help me out, help me out here, right? And until next time, listen. I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese in the Studio. And you're listening, and you just got finished listening to episode 2 of the S.C.A.L Method podcast. I'm going to see y'all in the next